A peculiar question popped into my mind recently. What even is a website today? This question arose because I was trying to figure out how to consolidate over 16 years of writing, podcasting, and teaching online. I was staring at the blank page of my staging site and feeling, well, that blank page energy. I set out to build a new site that I could design and structure however made sense, finally liberated from the conventions of a blog, podcast, personal brand, or social media. Without those conventions, though, I didn't know where to start. Hence my question, what even is a website today? In a digital ecosystem dominated by apps and platforms, non-app and non-platform websites atrophied. And that impacts the way we experience the digital world. Gita Jackson, one of the co-founders of Aftermath, put it this way in her recent ode to websites. Quote, I cannot remember the last time I actually went to a website and browsed, took my time discovering the way a person expressed themselves through code. The trendiest website designs today are bare bones, often single-page business cards with a contact form. Many of them are beautiful. But what is their purpose beyond looking good and holding a domain name? Nilay Patel, editor-in-chief of The Verge, often says that The Verge is the last website on Earth, which he told Hank Green in an interview is only 50% a joke.
It's weird to be us, our age, and hear that the word website feels almost anachronistic. It feels of another era.
The Verge underwent a significant overhaul not too long ago, with the idea of making it a destination for their fans and for their staff. They designed the site to be a place their journalists wanted to create content, including short-form content. And they wanted it to be a place that readers would visit daily, if not more often than that.
And I think if you look around the media landscape right now, more and more people are starting to realize, we should just make the websites more valuable. And the easiest way to make the websites more valuable is to have our talented people make more stories. And not just more stories, but openly have more fun on the website.
Right.
Patel often says he's preparing for Google Zero, the day that search engine traffic, long the ultimate safety net for gaining eyeballs, finally dries up.
The last platform on the web of any scale or influence is Google search.
Mm-hmm.
And so over time, web pages have become dramatically optimized for Google search. And that means the kinds of things people write about, the containers that we write in, are mostly designed to be optimized for Google search. They're not designed for...
By making the website a place people want to go, rather than a place they just sort of end up, he and his team are planning for the site's long-term viability regardless of which way the internet winds may blow. The Verge is a bustling tech news and analysis website for which I struggle to find a helpful analog metaphor. There are product reviews, but it's not a shopping mall. There is copious tech journalism, but it's not a newspaper or a magazine. There are videos and podcasts, but it's not a 24/7 news channel. There is breaking short-form content, but it's not a social media platform. The Verge defies conventions. To paraphrase the great David S. Pumpkins, The Verge is its own thing. I'm Tara McMullen, and this is What Works, the show that rethinks work, business, and leadership for the 21st century economy. In today's episode, I want to reflect on both my own challenges with wrangling my online presence and the ways the state of the web has made it extra challenging. While there's a lot to complain about when it comes to social media platforms and the billionaires wreaking havoc in online and offline spaces, this isn't that kind of episode. It's an effort to illuminate some less obvious issues that, in turn, can help us figure out what we want to do next. Part 1. Website Metaphysics. I've been actively building websites since 2008, both for myself and for others. This new one, where you might be listening to this, but probably not, has been the most challenging website project I've ever done, even though I haven't had to write a single line of code, unless you count the 100 plus redirects I had to map. Now, this website wasn't a challenge because building a website has gotten harder. It's so much easier today. It was a challenge because I had to figure out what this website would be before making any headway on the build. I had to decide on, or better yet, learn this website's metaphysics before I could begin the more technical task of importing and reconnecting hundreds of articles. And in the back of my mind, I worried about all the broken links. Between 2008 and 2015 or so, a website owner could expect to drive a bonkers amount of traffic from a social media platform to their own website. After 2015, the amount of traffic a website owner could expect from social media went down, even as follower counts continued to climb. It was then that we noticed platforms, especially Facebook, started to treat posts that kept users on the platform differently from posts that invited users to click away. Posts that contained links wouldn't get the reach that posts without links got. And if no one sees your link, they can't choose to click on it. Website owners, including myself, responded by housing more and more content on the platforms themselves. Now, I've been a proponent of this strategy and continue to be in the right situation. If you want to make it on social media, you need to put remarkable content on your chosen platform instead of links to remarkable content on your own website. The question is, do you want to make it on social media? Or do you want to do something, anything else? Over time, the buildup of self-imposed obligation took its toll. We were, and are, enriching billionaires for the privilege of hustling to make content, respond to comments, and keep up with the latest trends. That is, capitalist whims made manifest in templates of virality. Under those conditions, we started to lose ourselves. Or rather, I should speak for myself. I started to lose myself. One effect of making things online for as long as I have is a sense of dispersion, a dilution, or maybe a decentralization of place. I've built websites at TaraGentili.com, later TaraMcMullen.com, ExploreWhatWorks.com, and WhatWorks.fyi. And those are just the 3 sites that still exist, or rather did, up until I did some domain magic with the website that you may or may not be on right now. The sites that I once tended, handmaidinpa.net and scoutygirl.com, I handed over to other caretakers, and neither of those sites exists anymore. My very first blog, hosted at the defunct Zanga.com, is minimally archived on the Wayback Machine, but is otherwise lost to time as well. I deleted my Twitter profile late in 2024, not long after I completely abandoned Instagram. My Facebook profile has lain dormant since 2017, aside from a perfunctory post about my book in 2022. There are dozens of workshops withering in my Crowdcast account, probably thousands of forum posts and communities that I've either run or participated in, and about 100 podcast episodes lost in a series of layoffs at the company I worked with early in the show's run. My digital identity has become a long series of broken links. The digital world, which seems to encompass more of the quote-unquote real world every year, draws a very fuzzy line between permanence and impermanence. The content of the web seems to exist in a state that is both ephemeral and lasting. It is easy to lose your work, your friends, your reputation, perhaps even yourself on the internet. At the same time, because the internet is forever, services exist to scrub or bury the lingering vestiges of former moods, misdeeds, or cringeworthy moments. There are bits of me strewn across the web. Many, perhaps even most, are broken off from the network that loosely binds the accounts, domains, and mentions that I think of as active. Some of those broken off bits are tied to my old name. Some are tied to old brands. Others are tied to old opinions, interests, or relationships. These bits have been discarded or forgotten, yet they persist. Before embarking on this website project, I didn't really have a home on the web anymore, and I hadn't since the Obama era. Part 2. Digital Homelessness. Writer Venkatesh Rao connects the experience of this kind of disaggregated digital life with the experience of homelessness. Now, this is not a comfy parallel. The risk of false equivalency is very real, but I do think this parallel, this metaphor, is an instructive one. Rao theorizes the experience of homelessness as the gradual disintegration of the boundary between private identity and public identity. The home is not only a shelter, but also a psychological boundary that shapes one's private identity. That sense that home is where you can be yourself. Rao writes, homelessness is about more than lacking a base that offers protection from the elements and material security. It's about lacking an integrated identity, a home persona that is contained and shaped by and active within the home as a psychological boundary. He continues, this sort of collapsed, derelict condition can appear around any disintegrated dimension of being. He suggests joblessness as an example. Being without a job disrupts a critical sociocultural dimension of identity. The broken link between occupation and self challenges one's ability to belong in a society that prizes that connection. Perhaps the booming nostalgia for the 90s and early 2000s generally, and the early web specifically, is in part a longing for an integrated, at-home identity online. Those of us who had a Zanga site, or a LiveJournal, or a GeoCities page, or even a MySpace page know what it was like to have a digital home that was connected to a bigger social ecosystem. Early users of forums and bulletin boards know what it was like to have a digital neighborhood rather than a hashtag community. These services encouraged us to decorate our homes, paint the walls, add art and music, display meaningful items. And yeah, those digital homes were janky. They were mismatched disasters of design. But they were ours. Pre-newsfeed Facebook did away with the idiosyncrasies of personalization, but still focused on the individual profile, even if it was reduced from a home to a wall. Then, social media feeds coaxed many of us to shed our at-home digital identities and take on a public identity full-time. Our personal websites began to take on the bland sameness of a subdivision. Lot after lot of variations on the same uninspired design. Sometimes I lounge next to my husband while he scrolls TikTok after work. I lay my head on his chest and watch the videos in his feed. And let me tell you, his FYP is weird. As in, he's carefully shaped his feed to be as full of weird TikTok as possible. There's a lot of stuff in his feed that I don't get. There's a lot that I even actively dislike. But it's a good reminder that content doesn't have to be the equivalent of millennial gray to be seen, or even to be popular. Recently, I helped my daughter set up a website, a blog more or less. Independently of any suggestion on my part, she decided she wanted the homepage to showcase the books she's reading and the vinyls she's listening to. She envisioned something eclectic and personal to house her work. At 16, she has no real nostalgia for how the web used to be. She's never had a home online, but she still feels that same longing that I do, and that maybe you do too. I think she's starting to realize that the suffocating sameness she consumes via infinite scroll is not the kind of vital media she wants to create. I've long bemoaned the lack of risk-taking, creativity, and thoughtfulness among the people who market themselves online or aspire to be full-time creators. With glorious, though rare exceptions, much of what passes for content on the web is the product of checklists and best practices designed to please machines rather than people. I've thought a lot about how the practical realities of making things on the web defy the vision we've been sold, that of unprecedented access to modes of expression. The so-called creator economy is merely the latest gloss on the schemes of men who've broken into the billionaire class. Yet, I hadn't considered how the fracturing and disintegration of my digital self impacted me personally, as in my for real identity. The politics and economics of the situation are clear and have been for a long time. The challenges to my livelihood and any sense of financial stability are palpable. But until I read Rao's essay on digital homelessness, I didn't have the mental model necessary to make sense of the disorientation I felt. Rao's phenomenology of homelessness is one of broken links. Home is the ultimate anchor text, weaving various expressions of self together and shaping them into a cohesive, if not always consistent, internal system. In fact, home is a place for inconsistency, a place for idiosyncrasies, a place where the only person we have to make sense to is ourselves. Part 3. Google hates broken links like NIMBYs hate tent cities. We might think of a hyperlink as a doorway from one piece of content to another. But a link itself is content. The link is capacious, containing information about relevancy, authority, recency, and quality, in addition to information about the relationship between content pages. And this is why hyperlinks have been so important to search engine algorithms and, consequently, search engine optimization. If Site A is a respected authority on topic X, and Site A links to Site B, talking about topic Y, then search engine algorithms can deduce that sites A and B are connected, that topics X and Y are connected, and that Site A's authority can transfer to Site B. Search engines, of course, have access to billions or trillions of these connections and can deduce all sorts of things about the various web pages they index. In this way, broken links aren't merely a lack of signal. A broken link is its own type of signal, one that contains negative information. A handful of broken links on a website isn't a big deal, because the signal of the unbroken links counteracts the negative signal that the broken links broadcast. But a website full of broken links? Well, that's bad news. Not only is it a terrible experience for the user who can't find what they're looking for, but a site full of broken links indicates to search engines that the site is no longer relevant or trustworthy. Links have to be made to be broken, though. And the platformization of the internet has rendered linking almost passé. Simply put, sharing someone's article on Blue Sky is fine, but that act doesn't have the same effect as linking to the article on my website. The platform is an intermediary that obfuscates the link's content. When I link to Anil Dash's article on the web renaissance, that link is contained in an essay reflecting on the current state of the website, on a website that reflects on the current state of work, written by someone with a modicum of authority on these topics. Further, the link itself is a bit of HTML that wraps a tiny bit of content, the anchor text, which further signals the topic under discussion. Now, we've been platform pilled to believe that sharing is caring. Reposting, commenting, or sharing a link to content that's not our own is a service we can do for others. And that's not untrue, per se. But it's no substitute for a link from my site to another, or from another site back to mine. When I share someone's work on Instagram, for example, I contribute to Meta's information ecosystem. When I link from my website to another website, I contribute to the open information ecosystem of the wider web. Any bot that can read HTML, which is all of them, can understand the content of my link and integrate that information into its index. A link is my chance to reach out and build a bridge while also shoring up my own foundation. So yeah, broken links are a problem. And they're a problem I'm currently working on. If you've run into any on my site recently, I'm sorry, I'm trying real hard. But the lack of links, the lack of signal, is making our wider information ecosystem more fragile. A lack of links contributes to the disintegration of our digital projects as much as broken links. Part 4. Digital hoarding. The term unhoused rather than homeless has gained popularity with some progressives in recent years. The Guardian reports the term's first use on Twitter in 2008, but 2020 seems to be the year it became widespread among scholars and advocates. This terminology, among other things, aims to demonstrate that a lack of housing is a choice of institutions and policy, rather than an individual choice. Unhoused highlights the systemic and institutional failings, rather than implying a personal failing. This shift is an important one that can reduce stigma and pressure communities or governments to act. Yet, a housed person can still be homeless if we accept Rao's framing that being at home is the experience of passing through the boundary of public and private into a space where one can be oneself. Temporary housing, like a shelter, meets basic physical needs, but it rarely provides for the emotional and existential need of privacy. Now, I'll add here that outside of Rao's framing, people who work in the field note that an unhoused person often does have a home, their city, their encampment, their group. So I'll accept, as I hope you do, that this terminology itself is a little fuzzy. Home, as Rao observes, and as this shift in terminology can demonstrate, is more than shelter. Having shelter, even owning a house or renting an apartment, doesn't preclude someone from experiencing something we could call homelessness. For example, hoarding seems to create an experience akin to homelessness as Rao describes it. In the case of hoarding, the self doesn't disintegrate as the boundary between public and private dissipates, but instead, the self disintegrates or dissolves into the accumulating stuff within the private space. Hoarding is often attributed to a way to feel safe, buffered from the scarcity and meaninglessness of the wider world. But eventually, the stuff itself becomes the threat, physically, emotionally, and psychically. Letting go of the stuff seems impossible, since the stuff has become an externalized part of the self. Adding to the stuff buoys the self, if unsatisfyingly, while getting rid of the stuff means getting rid of part of yourself. Hoarding is also part of the experience of digital culture today. Again, I realize I'm risking false equivalency for this metaphor. But digital hoarding is often why we download new apps, set up new profiles on new platforms, and keep finding new trends and accounts to follow. It's why we buy domain name after domain name, why we start podcasts and abandon them after publishing the first episode, why we produce more and more and more content. While IRL hoarding focuses on consumption, accumulation, and an inability to move on from possessions, digital hoarding can encompass both digital consumption and digital production. We produce more and more digital stuff because it feels safer than doing otherwise. Frenzied production acts as a buffer against platform-imposed scarcity. The more we say, the more we can rest assured we must be saying something meaningful. Making stuff online takes on the same affective characteristics of buying and amassing stuff in the material world. Philosopher Rahel Yagi argues that alienation is a relation of relationlessness. The work the alienated subject does and the stuff they consume exists separate from their capacity to act on it. The alienated subject lacks a relationship with their work or their stuff. They are rendered helpless, reduced to tools for reproducing and enshittifying the auraless material of daily life. Rebecca Falkoff observes something similar in her book, Possessed, A Cultural History of Hoarding. She writes, "Hoarding marks a dangerous threshold at which control over objects cedes to a sense of helplessness before the material world." So digital hoarding, we might say, marks the threshold at which control over one's digital identity cedes to a sense of helplessness before the digital world. We once exercised control over the stuff of our digital identities. Now we submit to the feed, the algorithm, even the follower or subscriber. We once possessed an online presence. Now the online world possesses us, something ever more salient amidst the ascendant tech broligarchy. I began groping at this theory to explain why I did indeed feel helpless as I stood before the mountains of stuff that had accumulated in my digital homes and contemplated the future of my online presence. The sense of helplessness stemmed from not only my disinterest in most social media platforms today, but also my seeming inability to devise a plan for reintegrating and consolidating my digital work, and hence my digital identity. Building a website or joining a new online community once sparked joy. Now, I struggled to decide what went into the keep, donate, or discard piles. Broken links, like piles of old newspapers or an overflowing collection of glass bottles, aren't just messy. They indicate a separation from the flow of foundational systems and infrastructure. Broken links are relations of relationlessness. Broken links are instances of disconnection and disintegration. Like the hoarder, I tell myself that this article or that free download might be useful to someone. What if somebody needs it someday? What if I need it someday? I worry there will be less of me without the clutter of content that marks the boundary of my online identity. I agonize over what the bots who crawl my various websites will do if it's all gone tomorrow. In her book, American Bulk, Emily Mester wrestles with the drive to consume, whether as a hoarder, a compulsive shopper, or just a person trying to keep up with a world that seems to have few pleasures outside of retail. The hub of the essay collection is a 3-part piece about her father's childhood home in a small town in Iowa. Mester's grandmother lived in that house for 36 years, accumulating the objects of a long life while disposing of very few. When she retired and moved closer to Mester's family, she simply closed the door on that house, abandoning it and the stuff that filled every corner. Before her visit, the only other time Mester had seen the house was as a child, and only long enough to fetch her grandmother. She writes, "As I sat in the idling car, I watched my dad walk up and ring her doorbell. I watched the door swing open just wide enough to let her slip out, 2 plastic bags in hand. She closed and locked it behind her." Mester begged to go inside, but her grandmother replied, "Honey, you don't want to see that boring thing." While attending graduate school in Iowa, Mester resolved to finally visit her grandmother's house. Mester writes, "Nobody knew what state she left it in, and nobody knew what state it was in now. We knew she took almost nothing with her. We knew she never wanted to go back. We knew she had been in a fight with the water company for months before she left, and that she refused to pay her bill, though we didn't know why. We didn't know how she managed without running water. We heard from an acquaintance that the lights occasionally flickered on and off. It might now be a meth lab. It might contain a family of squatters. It might be gutted and left unlocked, an open secret. It might have a hole through which the world poured in. Or it might be untouched, the exact same, but rotting." When Mester and her girlfriend arrive at the house, she's unable to pick the lock to the front door. So they peer in the window as best they can and surmise that no squatters or amateur chemists have been inside. They try the garage door, but even as it starts to give way, they lose their nerve. Later that night, while watching Hoarders in her motel room, Mester reflects on the disconnect between mess and maker. She writes, "The TV show wanted me to see people obsessed and compelled, but far more than that. I saw people who, somewhere along the normal cycle of consumption, had been paralyzed into a deep ambivalence. Our living naturally creates piles of disorder, and it requires tremendous effort to work against that entropy." The same could easily be said of creators, influencers, and the rest of us who build lives and homes on the internet. Most of us aren't preternaturally obsessed or inexplicably compelled to make all the content. Somewhere along the normal cycle of digital consumption and production, we succumb to the futility of trying to keep up. Doing anything other than continuing to supply the fire hose of content trends, memes, and headlines is too much. Entropy ensues. Mester's grandmother emailed ahead of her visit.
"I have absolutely no sentiments for the place, but emptying it is problematic.
I could say the same about my websites with thousands of outdated posts and hundreds of abandoned pages. I have no sentiments for most of my old writing and thinking. But emptying those sites is problematic. Getting rid of any one post isn't a problem. It's jettisoning the archive. The parts don't matter to me, but I suppose the whole does. The whole feels like a link to who I was and what I accomplished. Breaking that link is problematic in a way that redirecting a post or two just isn't." Part 5. Rebuilding. Hoarding and homelessness are both solvable problems. A universal basic income, subsidized housing, and rezoning more neighborhoods for high occupancy buildings could quickly stem the tide of homelessness. Hoarding is perhaps a bit trickier, but since many consider it an impulse away from scarcity and instability and toward a feeling of having enough, I can think of more than a few economic policy changes that could ease those fears as well. Digital hoarding and digital homelessness are also solvable problems. But what does that solution look like? I finally had a breakthrough while I was researching this essay. Looking for resources on archival studies, I happened upon a book called Creating Digital Exhibits for Cultural Institutions by Emily Marsh. It's exactly as advertised. A manual for guiding curators, librarians, and archivists through the process of designing a digital exhibit, that is, a website or a web page, to show off a particular collection. I initially passed over it because I wanted something more like Intro to Museum Studies. But curiosity got the best of me, and I eventually cracked it open. Marsh lays out several prerequisites for the person curating a digital exhibition. First and foremost, they need a willingness to engage with their content on a level deep enough to perceive its meaning and significance. Understanding the audience, including what they would find interesting, valuable, or compelling, is also critical. Further, they need the ability to envision the content in a creative way. Marsh also makes clear that her intent is for the reader to see the act of producing an exhibition as a creative endeavor, not a purely utilitarian or practical one. At that point, I stopped what I thought I was doing, plunked myself down on the couch, and started devouring the book. And while I am neither a curator nor a cultural institution, I realized that the content of my existing websites was an archive. Duh. It was messy and disorganized, but it was an archive. So, what if I viewed my project not as building a new website, but as preparing a digital exhibition of my work? Further, what if I made this new site a creative endeavor rather than a utilitarian or practical one? And what if this website was useful and compelling to me, in addition to the people who might visit? How might that change the very way I write, podcast, and produce content? Mester argues, correctly I believe, that the American dream is one of abundance and excess. But she writes that it's also, quote, an equally American dream to be able to abandon, drop everything, to jettison without guilt anything that weighs you down. The internet promises both too. We have an overabundance of information, hot takes, and images vying for our attention. The more we scroll, the more we accumulate #knowledge. The more we create, the more we amass status and influence. But the internet also provides us with the ability to unplug, delete accounts, revise our personal histories. We can jettison what weighs us down with the click of a button. We can break our links without a second thought. And indeed, those can feel like the only options, either all in amidst the digital hoard or all out on the digital street. Plugged in or unplugged, linked or unlinked. And I want something different. I want a third way. I want to break the links I want to break and fortify those I want to keep connected. I want to work towards something bigger than my next essay or newsletter. I want to reintegrate my online identity, bring a little homebody energy back to my corner of the web. I don't know if the result will be anything like a digital exhibit as Marsh describes it, but I'm inspired by the idea. I've already begun to think about the work I do this year as adding to or refining my archive rather than feeding the content machine. I've started to think of my archive in collections, series I've produced, topics I often write on, and formats I like to use. I'm thinking about creating exhibits that go beyond the written or audio essay format to make creative use of page layouts or interactive features. Instead of fighting inconsistency and idiosyncrasy, I want my digital home to link disparate interests and ideas. Scarcity or abundance, permanence or impermanence, broken or connected, these are, as ever, false binaries. The promise of a website is a liminal space in which we decide what's on display and what's not. A website is whatever we decide it's going to be, a creative endeavor that links what's meaningful and significant to us with what might be meaningful and significant to others. At least, that's what a website is to me. Today's episode was written, edited, and produced by me, Tara McMullen. What Works is a production of Yellow House Media, a boutique audio and video production studio that turns meaningful ideas into remarkable content. What Works is produced on the ancestral homeland of the Conestoga and Susquehannock people, and the Yellow House is located on the lands of the Salish and Kootenai peoples. You can check out the What Works archive at whatworks.fyi, where you'll find a written essay version of this episode. Plus, you can find out more about working with me to turn your own meaningful ideas into remarkable content.